All right, hey guys, we are on the low carb cruise, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing Dave Feldman, one of the leading movers and shakers in the lipid thought community, who are actually thinking about cholesterol, LDL, triglycerides in a meaningful, rational manner, actually trying to figure out what exactly we should be worried about. Should we be worried about a total cholesterol that's high? Is that a risk factor for heart attack and stroke? Is that dangerous if you go see your doctor and he says, oh my God, your LDL's high, you need to take a statin? And so I'm gonna just ask this guy, this brainiac of a guy, some questions and let him talk. Okay, you ready? So we have a lot of newcomers, a lot of people they understand that there's something going on here, and it's a thing, but they don't really understand the details. So I have so many people who do keto for 3 months, 6 months, and then they go see their doctor. And he's like, oh my God, your total cholesterol's high and your LDL's high, you gotta take a statin. And it's that keto diet, you should stop that immediately and take the statin. And so talk to that guy that just got that news, and his wife was sitting there and she's giving him the look, and now what the hell? What is he supposed to do?
So a couple things. First of all, usually I find that that's after the doctor just said, wow, all of these other markers look fantastic, but it looks as if the cholesterol's bad, right? And this is where I kind of want to freeze time for a moment and say there are other lipid numbers that can be of a concern. For example, if you go on a ketogenic diet and you see your triglycerides go up, which is unlikely, but for some, if they see that, that's something worth paying attention to. Or if you see your HDL go down, also unlikely. It's usually the reverse for both of those. That's worth paying attention to. But let's say that both of those go the other direction. Your HDL goes up, your triglycerides go down, and your LDL cholesterol goes up. The truth is, it's actually very common in a ketogenic diet. Now, when I started my journey in the research, which started just actually a little less than 3 years ago, I found that I could manipulate these numbers substantially. In fact, I kind of have the distinction now of, I think, manipulating them more than anybody else I'm aware of. Mainly because I found out that being powered by fat means that you are necessarily trafficking more of the particles known as lipoproteins, lipid-carrying proteins. You're transporting them around in your body. You need to, because they carry the fatty acids that your tissues use. And guess what ride shares with those fatty acids? Cholesterol. So I not only find that there are a number of people that see their LDL cholesterol go up, even though those other two markers improve substantially, but I likewise will see that it makes more sense, because effectively, if you needed more of those boats to carry the cargo, but the cargo's missing, they're succeeding. They're succeeding at dropping off those fatty acids. Now, to your point about statins, the irony is I don't really have a strong position on statins because I kind of can't. The problem is that statins, and there's a study that was just released last month, and it's a quote I put up on Twitter where it pointed out, no statin trial ever has shown a statistically significant decrease in all-cause mortality. That is just dying, period. Like, never mind cardiovascular disease or any of that, just straight up living or dying. It's never shown a decrease, except for one trial, which was Jupiter, and that had a number of problems, but even then, it actually had an entry of super high levels of inflammation for the participants in the trial. So knowing that alone, I don't even put that much effort into doing much research with statins, because for me personally, I would rather die of a heart attack at 80 instead of dying of cancer at 70.
Exactly. And so I think that's a great point to hit again, is that there's really never been a randomized controlled trial done properly that showed that statins decrease your risk of dying. Correct. And the whole reason that we take medication is either to cure illness or to not die. That's kind of what we're doing that for. And so if you've been taking, Zocor, Lipitor, ignorant statin, stupid statin for all these years, you were doing that for a reason. You weren't just doing that to make your wife happy or your whatever. You were doing that to decrease your risk of having a life-ending event like a heart attack or a stroke. And so when we start looking at the numbers and really crunching them properly, it looks like that none of these studies that doctors kind of hung their hat on really show that statins do that at all. And so that's why when you go to the doctor and your total cholesterol is up and your LDL may be up and your doctor's freaking out, you should ask him, hey, what about my triglycerides? Did they go up or down? Because that's actually important.
And it's got a much stronger correlation with both cardiovascular disease and all-cause mortality. You generally want your triglycerides at least below 150, but ideally below 100 milligrams per deciliter. If you are, it's almost, to me, from my mechanistic model, it's almost irrelevant what your LDL cholesterol or your LDLP, the particle count, is if your triglycerides are low. Again, from a mechanistic model, what we're talking about is a bunch of empty boats. So they're actually succeeding at dropping off. And here's where I should really emphasize something special. On Twitter right now, it's now several months old, I want to say 3 months old, I have a challenge that I put out. Because there's one study that I've been able to find after looking really hard to find any study that stratified a group of normal, non-treated people that had low triglycerides and high HDL cholesterol and high LDL cholesterol, like so many ketogenic people do, that showed they were dying of high rates of cardiovascular disease. And you want to know how many studies I've gotten?
How many?
None. I've got no studies that show a low amount of triglycerides, a high amount of HDL, even with a high amount of LDL cholesterol.
What's your Twitter handle?
It's Dave Keto.
Dave Keto,
yeah. And
he's got a pretty darn active Twitter account, so if you're on Twitter, you should definitely follow him and just watch him almost taunt the cholesterol community and say, hey, show me a study. Let me see the study, because I want you to prove me wrong.
I try to be as congenial as I can, but it's absolutely true. I pinged a lot of the top LDL lowering experts, even the president of the Lipid Association. I've said, look, there seems to be, and certainly I'm one of them, there seems to be a lot of people who take comfort in very low levels of triglycerides, very high levels of HDL. It seems to be, when you stratify it out, it doesn't matter what your level of LDL cholesterol is. Because that's what I seem to see myself, and Framingham seems to prove this. The Framingham Offspring study showed when you stratify for that group, they have low levels of cardiovascular disease. Then it's hard for us to be able to come to the conclusion that it is a risk factor as long as the other lipid markers look great, and especially if you have low inflammation markers. There's no question about this. Just about everybody, vegan, paleo, on every side, agrees that if you have hyperinsulinemia, if you have sustained high levels of insulin, if you have sustained high inflammation, that's real chronic disease, and that's something you definitely want to take care of, because that absolutely is a cardiovascular risk.
Yes.
And there's no debating on that one.
Right, and that's been proven with pretty darn good science.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Whereas the total cholesterol and the LDL theory of heart disease, the research showing that is tenuous at best, and then when you really start digging into some of the studies, like the Jupiter, you're like, wait, who put this study together? Yeah, wow. And so I just wanted to bring you this guy and let you hear this. I mean, I don't know of anyone who's really digging deeper into the cholesterol and the LDL and the HDL theories of heart disease and chronic disease more than you.
Well, I think that there definitely are people who are more on the research bookworm side. For me, it's more about engineering to find what is the mechanistic reason as to why it makes sense for those of us on a low-carb diet. And that I feel like I'm helping to kind of bring some new to light. The bottom line is, if you're powered by fat, there's a mechanistically sensible, in fact, I would argue appropriate reason that you not only see higher levels of LDL cholesterol, but that it makes even more sense the fitter and thinner you are, which is what we see oftentimes. In fact, there's a particular profile I bring up a lot that I call a lean mass hyperresponder. Hyperresponder being somebody who saw their cholesterol go up, but a lean mass hyperresponders, they tend to have the highest LDL cholesterol, but they also tend to have the lowest triglycerides and the lowest the highest HDL cholesterol.
Right.
And amazing markers. I mean, inflammation, lowest that I typically see in any panel. And they often tell me the same thing. I don't know what I can do because I've never felt better than I have my whole life than I do right now. Is there any way I can keep from having to go on a statin or abandoning this lifestyle? And to be fair, my short answer is I don't know, because I don't claim to have absolute knowledge that other people claim to. I can just say that I can provide the mechanistic reason as to why it could make sense.
This guy's sitting in his doctor's office right now. Who is this? Oh, Martha. Martha's sitting in her doctor's office right now, so she's taking notes. So tell Martha, what should she ask her doctor if he says, oh my gosh, your LDL's high, you need a statin? Give her some thought-provoking questions to ask her doctor.
Okay, first things first. You want to learn something called the NNT, number needed to treat. And the number needed to treat for a statin is 104. That is to say that for every 104 people that take a statin, one will not die of cardiovascular disease because of a statin.
For how long a period of time do they need to take it for that to be?
Yeah, I think it's like 5 years.
I think it's 5 years.
Like
Yeah. And so 104 people would have to take it every day for 5 years in order for one person
to not die specific. And the reason I say specifically cardiovascular disease is, as I said earlier, your chance of dying won't change.
Yeah.
So all you're doing is you're saying, I'm going to switch what I died of to not cardiovascular disease and something else instead.
Yeah.
But this claim can be made, and we've got, again, that study from last month, which will just say this. There is no statistically significant drop in cardiovascular disease shown by any statin trial yet. And so from that alone, that's already one statement. But there's another thing, which is just overall, it's not that cardiovascular disease goes on exactly one track. Even if you were to give it to them, that LDL cholesterol was in fact a risk factor, there are a huge list of risk factors that low carb, high fat helps to resolve. One of them is weight, blood pressure. Again, inflammation markers. Your HSCRP, your C-reactive protein, has probably dropped substantially, as is often with most of them. And these are all things that you want to take into account, as they are all also risk factors, not just for cardiovascular disease, but for all-cause mortality. I can't ever emphasize this enough. A lot of people like to steer towards cardiovascular disease in particular because that helps to sell drugs. I'm always coming back to the same thing. Am I going to live or am I going to die? Am I going to live longer or am I going to die sooner? And at the end of the day, you have to show me research that's going to show me that, in fact, I would live longer by taking the drug you're wanting to provide me. Bottom line is, I don't see cholesterol-lowering drugs having that level of benefit that I've been looking for. I've never seen it.
And so, Martha, being a lady, is there because there may be a little bit of research that shows that a man after a certain age, if he's had a previous MI, there might be a tiny bit of protective benefit from taking a statin, but it's probably from the anti-inflammatory effect of the statin and not from the actual cholesterol-lowering ability of the statin. But as a woman, have you ever seen any meaningful research done for a woman who's never had a heart attack that even, I mean, what would the number needed to treat be for a woman who's never had a heart attack?
I'm sure that's a rhetorical question
It
because
is.
I think you already knew the answer to that.
Infinity.
Yes. I actually make this joke regularly. If I were a female when I started out my research, there probably wouldn't be no cholesterol code or any research, because I came across so much that showed that every female at every stage of life, and this by the way included smokers,
Yep.
the higher their cholesterol, the lower their all-cause mortality. And I don't have the links handy, but there are two large studies. One of them that was out of Japan from, I want to say, 3 or 4 years ago. It had around 98,000. And I'm gonna give you the links for this for show notes later. Another one that was out of Norway that was, I want to say, 40 or 50,000.
So not small studies, and you guys hear me talk about this all the time. I don't care about a study with 20 people in it. I don't even know what it showed. I don't care, because it has no power to predict, right? It has no power to prove causation. But when you're having a study that's got thousands, tens of thousands, 50,000 people in it, that's a powerful study if it's designed correctly, and you can really pull a lot of meaningful data from that you can actually apply to your life. And so that's the huge studies that he's talking about.
And both of them showed they divided, I believe the females were divided into quintiles in each of them. And for each quintile, the higher their cholesterol went, the lower their all-cause mortality. For men, it was a little more of a U-shape, even though the lowest cholesterol had the highest all-cause mortality for both groups.
The lowest cholesterol men died more often than
the highest level.
Than the highest level cholesterol.
But for women, it was like pronounced, very clear that I mean, generally speaking, I would want my own mom and my own sister to have as high cholesterol as they could have.
Exactly right.
Given the studies that I was looking at there.
Exactly right. And so it'd be a valid question for Miss Martha to say, Doctor, I'm a woman, I've never had a heart attack. Is there any research to even indicate that I should even take a statin at all?
That's a great question.
Is it even indicated in females? What study is that based on? Maybe ask him to print you out a copy of the study that he's basing that on, because you know any statin that you're diagnosed is going to have a 3-page list of possible side effects. Why would you want to take the risk for all those possible side effects if there's never been a single study that showed that a woman got any medical benefit whatsoever from taking a statin? Maybe ask your doctor that. Don't you pity her doctor when she gets in the exam room? Don't you pity her doctor? Oh. She's going to wear him out.
Well,
sorry, doctor. I don't know.
And there's one other thing. There's one other thing I want to get across to all your listeners. This is very important. As you get to learn a lot about this research, you find that there's a lot of, and I don't want to use a word like shenanigans, but I will say a lot of modeling and adjustments and sort of, I'll just say selectivity of a lot of the data. And that's why I like with my challenge that I have, the low carb cholesterol challenge, I say normal, non-treated, as in no genetically specialized group of people and no already treated group of people. So for example, right now they're in lipidology, they're trying to turn on HDL cholesterol and saying it's a meaningless marker. And historically, we know that it's an extremely meaningful marker, that unless it's for alcoholic reasons, if you have high HDL-C, it's a good outcome for you. But the reason they're turning on it is because there's some recent drug trials where the drug brought up the HDL, and that resulted in more deaths. Well, that's a drug modifying your lipid system and then having a bad result. That should not count toward the total population. In fact, it's crazy that I even have to bring it up, honestly.
I agree. But we're having to battle the drug companies who stand to make billions. And so we have to say common sense things like 1 + 1 is 2. Sorry, I hate to be, the bearer of bad news. And so, I think that's a wonderful thing to understand, is that don't worry about your total cholesterol. Don't worry about your HDL, or don't worry about your LDL. But if your HDL, if you can bring it up with your diet, that's a very, very good marker. Okay, but if Big Pharma comes up with some pill that raises your HDL, it's not going to do it by any natural mechanism. Okay, because basically what they do is hack into one of your enzymes along the pathway and muck it up, and then you start building up other products that probably are not good for you. And so raise your HDL with your diet. Don't raise it with a pill. And I'm just putting that out there so that 16, 18, 24 months from now, when they come out with some new drug that raises your HDL, I want you guys to know that's not how you raise HDL. You raise HDL by eating a ketogenic diet. Yeah?
Yeah. That's one of the most powerful ways, and particularly saturated fat. Saturated fat typically brings up both HDL and LDL. But overall, if you even take cholesterol out of the equation, you see that there's an enormous amount of power in all-cause mortality towards having more saturated fat. Again, healthy fats. You want to keep it healthy. But without question, saturated fat is a very common thing that you're going to be powered by on a ketogenic diet.
Absolutely. Tell everybody, because you guys, they know multiple times I've said, go watch Dave Feldman's videos on YouTube. So tell them about your social media, where they can find you. If your wife is still not convinced, or your husband's still not convinced, or your doctor is still not convinced, this guy has an amazing amount of YouTube videos where he goes into detail with PowerPoint and with whiteboard, and so tell them where they can find you.
Well, of course, first of all, there's the blog itself, which is cholesterolcode.com. So that's probably where you'll find a lot of the links that we're talking about to a lot of these videos and so forth.
So if you guys want the research, the black and white, here's the study, go to his blog, and what is it again?
cholesterolcode.com. And there I also have a simple guide series to cholesterol and low carb. And it's very layperson friendly. It's got just a lot of illustrations. It's almost like a comic, right? And basically kind of takes you through the steps so that you kind of get a feel of how it is, but without it getting too geeky. But for those of you who do want to geek out, I do have a number of different presentations I've given to different mixed audiences. So sometimes it's in front of doctors and PhDs, and those get a little more technical. And sometimes it's in front of lay people. For example, the one we did here on the cruise, that was meant to be more for lay people, and I kind of take people through, the process using an analogy. That, by the way, is also, there's a version of that online right now from Low Carb Breckenridge. So if you do a search in YouTube for Dave Feldman cholesterol, you'll probably see that as one of the top hits is my talk from Breckenridge this year. And in that one, I kind of use the analogy of, you know, the world gets flooded, and how then would you get food around to the different houses that are out there?
Great analogy.
And it works because it gets people the understanding of the abstraction as to what's going on.
And without that sort of thing, the cholesterol theory of heart disease is so complicated. Most doctors, you know this, they don't understand the mechanisms. And so that's why they're happy to prescribe a drug that doesn't do anything. But when the patients start to actually, like, no, I watched Dave Feldman and he said, and here's the study, and here's a copy of the study, doctor, if you want to take that and read it later, which I would highly recommend you guys do, then this foolishness will stop. That's how you're going to stop this, is hand your doctor a study. Here, go read this. And then also, I would like the study that you were about to prescribe a woman who's never had a heart attack a statin. I want the study that shows that that was actually a good medical decision on your part, doctor.
And that's a fair question to ask. I mean, remember, at the end of the day, a doctor is not a god. It's unfair to you, for you and to them, for you to assign all power to them. You should take your health decisions into your own hands. And you should think of a doctor as a very intelligent and well-educated consultant. But to the degree with which they're going to consult on things, they need to be experts in that subject. And to put it very plainly, if your doctor is interested in prescribing to you medication for cholesterol, they should have some expertise in cholesterol. So, not that I'm wanting everybody to put them on a spot in a negative way. Be congenial and just say, I want to go by the data. Say, I would like to see studies that would counteract this information I've gotten online, which are also studies. It's not that I'm just listening to some blogger pontificate his opinions. I have actual studies that they can point me to that show, for example, as a female, that the higher my cholesterol is, the lower my all-cause mortality. What studies would you have that could show, conversely, the other side of it?
Yeah, I love that.
And if you could, please use normal populations. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't show me like Mendelian randomizations. Don't show me any way in which you can like work a certain population into a certain corner and then say, aha. Or for that matter, animal studies. Don't even get me started on that. I want to see real world examples of real people who have high levels of LDL cholesterol who are dying more. Because I can tell you right now, one of the first clues after I started this whole journey is I said, you know what, if this is true, the elderly population should be chock full of people who naturally have low LDL cholesterol. Like it should
that's
be just
how you
a
live so long.
Thing. Exactly.
You just have that,
And that's not at all what the science is showing. In fact, they call it a paradox, as they love to do a lot. But sure enough, as you get older, cholesterol becomes more beneficial. And they've had to acknowledge that begrudgingly, but they still give you a statin just in case.
Just in case. That's right. Exactly.
That's a lot of what they try to do.
And so, if you are a man and you've never had a heart attack, you really need to respectfully, politely print out the studies that Dave has on his blog and take them to your doctor if you're on a statin or he's trying to start you on a statin. And you need to say, here, doctor, I want you to read these. I know you're busy. Whenever you get a chance, just read these. And then also, whenever you get a chance, I want you to print out the study that shows that a 60-year-old man who's never had a heart attack, show me where the all-cause mortality goes down because I'm taking this statin. Or even really show me a good study where the cardiovascular risk goes down when I'm taking this statin. I would love to read that. And no rush, doctor. I know you're busy. With all due respect, you can have a week or two to find that study and print that out and leave it at the front desk for me. I think that's entirely reasonable because we're talking about your one life here. And I don't want you taking any pills that don't truly enhance your life or lower your risk of dying. That's what pills are supposed to do, right?
And I do want to tweak one thing. Be mindful of studies that go towards cardiovascular risk only. Do not show all-cause mortality. Because I have a running example. It's a bit comical, but it helps to illustrate it. I call it the cyanide diet, right? So I have a diet that I guarantee you will reduce your risk of dying by cardiovascular disease, also Alzheimer's disease, also infection, a whole slate of common diseases by 99.99999%. And that's my cyanide diet, right?
This is great.
So obviously the joke here is that if you take it, you'll die of cyanide right away. But you know what can be claimed accurately? You didn't die of a heart attack.
Right, it protected you
exactly
from a heart attack. Maybe it was cardioprotective, and that's the word you'll hear your doctor say. And so obviously the cyanide medication, you wouldn't want to take that, because what we're all interested in is having a long lifespan and a long health span. And if a statin does lower your risk of a heart attack, but what we're not talking about here is a lot of experts think that taking a statin increases your risk of cancers.
Correct.
Right?
And this is the point I'm trying to get to, is a drug can increase your risk of dying by something like cancer.
Right.
And by math alone, it succeeds at lowering your risk of dying by cardiovascular disease.
You didn't die of a heart attack because
Even
you died
if
of
you died
cancer.
sooner. Right.
You died of
died
cancer.
sooner of something else.
And so you can see how in the data it would be like, oh, the cardiovascular causes of death went down. But that's because they died 5 years earlier with cancer.
Right.
They didn't have time to have a heart attack. So it's not that it protected them from the heart attack, it just killed them with something else sooner.
That's
still bad.
That's why, and I'm so vocal about this, particularly on Twitter, and it's kind of an engineer thing, I think. Try doing this with your IRS agent. Try going there and being like, oh, I earned roughly $20,000. And they'll be like, what do you mean roughly? Well, that's my reported income from the job. Is that all the income you got? Well, it's the job. It's my main source of income, and it's the one we're focused on, right? The IRS agent is going to say, no.
That won't go over.
We're focusing on everything. Well, I'm sorry. It doesn't work for you to give me part of a mortality quote-unquote benefit if you're not showing me the mortality rate of everything else. Because not dying of one thing doesn't mean that you live longer. Only not dying of everything actually technically means that you live longer.
Yeah, I love it. Nora is studying to be a nurse practitioner, and she would love to know where she could find those studies. So tell her about your blog again.
So it's
Get ready, Nora.
It's cholesterolcode.com.
Cholesterol codes, all one word.
All one word.
.com, and that's where the studies are, Nora. Print them out and take them.
There's a top 10 list, which we actually just put up recently. That's a lot of our favorite studies.
Nice.
We're also going to have a master list of studies up in the near future, where we're actually going to break them out by different levels and categories and stuff.
Do you realize the damage Nora could do with her nurse practitioner class and her instructors if she took your studies and they actually looked at them?
Well, I actually, it's funny though, I actually have a lot of medical professionals who say they almost wish they didn't know this during the period of time that they're going to school, because unfortunately a lot of the education class is just not interested in hearing it. But I implore everybody to try to press for science. Yes. You know, it may take a lot of work, and it may be you only get to one person for every 10, but I've already seen this with the people who follow me and they talk to their doctors. It is true, probably 90% of your doctors won't listen to you. They'll say, I'm sorry, you don't know enough. I don't care who you're hearing it from on the internet. I don't care what studies you bring forward. But the one doctor who does, and there have been some, can often become a new advocate, and they're the ones you really want to get on board. You want to get more doctor connection. You want to get more doctors, like this one, to understand what it is that's so powerful about a ketogenic diet and why it's ultimately life-saving, as long as you can bring down those deleterious markers and become powered by fat appropriately.
Absolutely. And if you're the first person to take this to your doctor, he'll consider you a kook. Just be prepared for that. If you're the 5th person, he might listen for a second, but he's still going to be like, whatever, no, I'm the doctor, you're the patient. But if you're the 50th person, right, and you're the 100th person, at some point that hard-headed doctor's going to go, what the hell? Yeah. Right? And he's going to Google it. And he's going to look up a couple of these studies that you printed off Dave's blog. And he's going to look at them and go, shit, I don't know what to think about this. And then then you've let the cat out of the bag. And then he knows better. And then his days of just blindly prescribing statins are over. And you just saved hundreds of people in his practice from suffering from the side effects, possible side effects of taking a statin long term.
And sometimes it's just one. It's just one very credible patient who has a very methodical, and I can't emphasize enough, it can feel intimidating sometimes, but you want to be as patient with them as you would want them to be with you.
Exactly.
And say, look, this is a data-driven opinion. This isn't just an emotional one. As much as I may emotionally not want to go on a statin, I'm making an informed decision. And this is where I get my information from. And the people who are getting the information, I'm getting the information from, they too are interested in having this discussion, having this dialogue, because I definitely am. The whole reason I have the low-carb cholesterol challenge out there is because I genuinely am inviting people to challenge. It's the challenge, right? Yeah. It's not that I'm pontificating something and then ignoring every response. I'm actually cultivating every response that comes forward. I would want you to be the same way. I would want you to be as receptive as possible. but to emphasize that you feel the data is on your side if indeed you agree.
Absolutely. And that you actually touched on a key phrase, which is informed consent. That's a big deal for doctors. Like if you have a mole or something, before I take that off, I'm going to get informed consent, which means I'm going to explain to you the risks of doing that procedure, including infection, bleeding, scarring, right? And then the benefits of this procedure. The mole will be gone, right? Then you as a patient get to make an informed decision. And so you could absolutely say to your doctor, "Doctor, don't you want me to give you informed consent? Don't you want me to be informed? Because I thought that was a thing that doctors like." And that's a keyword trigger for your doctor, and he'll be like, "Well, of course I want you to give me consent from an informed standpoint." And say, "Well, then inform me. Don't just tell me you need this and don't ask any questions. Inform me so that I can give you my informed consent." And that will fluster your doctor, because it would fluster me if I did not know what I was talking about. I'd be like, "Crap, yeah, no, you're right. I do have to inform you," because that's one of the codes of medical ethics, is you cannot just do stuff to people without their consent. But even we went a step further and said you can't do stuff unless you inform them of the risks and benefits of this, then get their consent. You have to educate the patient before you perform a procedure. And so I think it should be the same way before you give them a potentially life-altering prescription medication.
It should be, but to be fair, the guidelines do kind of change that dynamic. Oftentimes, doctors will say, "Well, these are the guidelines as stated. I go off of the guidelines, and the guidelines are set by the experts in this field. How could you know better than the guidelines?"
Yeah.
So, bottom line is this, and this is one thing that I try to acknowledge openly, is no question, keto is very much an uncharted territory. And that's okay. It's okay to acknowledge that and be upfront. We can still have a lot of data to work with to determine what is actually positive and what is negative. And without question, the total number of things to me that speak to the positive is far larger. It's no question. But it's okay likewise to say, hey, you're absolutely right. If the doctor wants to say, we need a large population study of people on a ketogenic diet, for 20 years, for 50 years, I would agree with that, right? The larger question is, what are the markers right now that put me at risk? And again, there are so many more markers than LDL cholesterol, even if you were to give them LDL cholesterol, that a low-carb, high-fat diet improves.
Absolutely. I love it. So you guys check out Dave's blog, and if you just Google Dave Feldman or search on YouTube for Dave Feldman, there are hours of videos where he explains this in tons of detail, and under a lot of the YouTube videos, he has links off to the studies as well. But on his blog, tell us one more time your YouTube and your blog and any other social media.
Cholesterolcode.com is the blog. On social media, I'm very active on Twitter at Dave Keto. And if it ends up becoming a long form question, I encourage people to go to the blog and actually make a comment there. I'm also very active on YouTube. I don't know my YouTube address, but you can just do Dave Feldman Cholesterol, and I'm pretty much all.
And it may not be on his YouTube channel, but he's on everybody else's, because we all know he's the expert, right? Man, thanks so much.
Thanks for having me on.
Thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
Okay, guys. See you next time.